What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing emotion versus abstraction in street photography. I believe there's this misconception in street photography that one must either be purely documentary based, photographing life as it is, or a photographer who's looking to abstract reality and create their own artistic expression. But ultimately, one mustn't follow one or the other in order to create strong photographs. I believe actually to synthesize the raw emotion of the subject within our frames with the abstraction of the composition and form can elevate the photography that we create to a new height. And so essentially we want to balance the best of both worlds to create a photograph with strong form, with strong geometry, but also raw and visceral human emotion that photographs and captures the essence of the street, where the power of black and white lies in its ability to strip down to the basics, to allow you to focus on that moment, on that gesture, on the human emotion. It removes the distractions of the color around you. It removes all of the superfluous details when you crush the shadows and you expose for the highlights. And I find that the aesthetics of black and white create drama and intensity and can elevate the way in which we synthesize both emotion and abstraction in street photography. And so there's something about the use of black and white and its ability to give you this option of photographing either in an abstract way, using light and shadow, but also having this interplay between human emotion. And I find the best way to photograph the human emotion, the raw and visceral nature of life, photographing candidly is at the forefront of our practice in street photography. And so when you're making photographs of these expressions, you want to make sure that they are real moments that are unscripted, unposed, to go out there and photograph very quickly and make sure to never really bruise a scene. And what I mean is photograph life unposed, photograph life in a way that doesn't get in the way, where you can allow the emotional impact of the photograph speak for itself. And this to be something important in terms of capturing the human emotion, the sort of raw energy, the facial expressions, the moments themselves. You want to make sure that for the most part people are unaware of you making the photograph. And so photographing in a way that is a bit stealthy, maybe photographing in a way that will allow you to get closer without really bruising the scene by using the compact camera like a Ricoh GR. I find this to be the easiest solution and the best solution for practicing street photography these days, where nobody really notices you when you're photographing. And so, as a suggestion, use a small compact camera on the streets so that you can really get close to a scene. And this is just my personal idea because I find that when you're shooting with a smaller compact camera, you can get closer to people without them noticing and photograph these raw, candid moments. And so the human emotion in a frame can really elevate the mundane, because ultimately when you're looking at a photograph, you want it to have impact. And so the abstraction of reality, of using light and shadow, can add this visual impact synthesized with the emotional moment. I find the most ordinary scenes can become extraordinary through the use of light and shadow and the use of silhouettes or reflections, and the use of highlights and crushing shadows can add mystery and mood to the frame. And so the simplest interplay between light and shadow can be enough to evoke this emotional impact without really having to contrive anything or without having to even use people within your picture, where the essence, the feeling, the mood in the photograph can be carried through the use of light and shadow. And this is a very simple technique to both combine the raw human emotion with abstraction. And so using light and shadow, finding that interplay between human emotion and abstraction is a very fine line. But I believe it's something that we can achieve through understanding geometry, lines, and shape, but not becoming too obsessive with this thing. Having it in the back of our head and understanding how to make a composition should be second nature to us and become intuitive, where we don't want the photographs to feel too sort of bleak or dark, or not necessarily like cold or distant, right? Where sometimes you'll see a photograph and the subjects in the photograph are across the street, or the moment is very much minor in the frame, or you can't really see what's going on and you don't really feel connected to the scene. And so this is where closeness and proximity helps you photograph and capture those raw human emotions. And so we want to have a balance between abstraction and emotion. And so essentially, you want to have a photograph that is both structured but full of soul. And so you can use these techniques of light and shadow, silhouette, and geometric compositions to create something strong. But I believe that you shouldn't lean one or the other too far. And so combining both of these elements can allow you to create stronger photos. Sometimes I look for simple gestures, and the facial expression of a person can carry the frame. And making a photograph that's simple, that creates drama and mood and mystery in the frame, can be simply due to the way in which I frame a photograph using light and shadow to my advantage. And so there's a particular photographer who uses light and shadow to the maximum, somebody who I admire greatly, the great Ray K. Metzger. His approach of using deep shadows and exposing for the highlights is a very good example of blending abstraction with human presence. And I find that he essentially mastered the art of abstraction in street photography and is a really good example to look at in terms of combining both abstraction with human emotion. And so we'll look at some of his photographs here, as you can see, using the light and shadow and silhouette here to create an artistic expression of the streets that I believe to be beautiful, but also creates mystery and drama and this mood in the photograph that elevates it to a new height. And I find the approach of high contrast black and white on the streets can really hone in on the moments themselves in combination with abstraction. And so essentially, when you strip down to light and shadow play, you can focus on the thing that truly matters in the frame. And so you can see here in this book, I'll be flipping the page to this image of the man with the kite. And this photograph is so beautiful. You see this raw moment of him interacting at the scene with his eyes closed. However, he's against this black backdrop where he's kind of floating in space. And I find this to be a very beautiful and abstract way of photographing in the streets, where it creates a sense of mystery and drama, but also combines the best of both worlds between abstraction and that raw human emotion in the streets. And so this is something that I wanted to share with you, a bit of an example of one of the masters of street photography who really combined both abstraction with the emotional impact of a photograph. And so, here are a few of his photos from a book, The Photographs of Ray K. Metzger. And now here are some of my photographs using this approach to the streets, photographing in a way that crushes the shadows and exposes for the highlights. Using Ray Metzger's work and studying some of his photo books have given me a foundation and a building block to create upon. And I find to look at photo books and to study some of the greats, you can then have a good foundation of where to take things. And in this photograph, I made the exposure underexposed. I underexposed by one stop, and I crushed the shadows, and I have the subjects in the frame, which are these pigeons in flight, or these seagulls in flight, elevated from the mundane, sort of separated from that backdrop in a sort of ambiguous, sort of anonymous location where there are no details in the shadow, but what truly matters is elevated in the highlights. And so while this photograph does not have a human element in the frame, and you do not see an emotional, impactful gesture or moment in the picture, I believe it evokes a mood, and it does have this emotional impact that is synthesized with abstraction. And so balancing emotion and abstraction is a fine line, and it's tricky, but I believe that through having an understanding of the fundamentals of street photography, understanding form and shape and geometry, understanding how to create a composition that is coherent, using layers to add depth, and focusing on the moments, and having your intuition in tune with the rhythm and the beat of the street, where you can recognize the patterns in the way that people gesture, their emotional, sort of expressions, and have your timing down, right? All of this sort of like basic fundamental street photography chops that one must learn, you should have under your tool belt. And then by understanding the complexities of the street, understanding how to create a composition will give you this foundation to then elevate the photograph through abstraction, through the way that you position subjects in the frame, through the way that you balance the emotion and the composition in the photographs we make. And so we'll look at a couple of case studies from my work, sharing with you some examples that don't necessarily use black and white photography. I want to highlight in this video that you can shoot color and find this fine line between abstraction and human emotion. And so here at this scene, we have this strong moment, this emotional, impactful moment of the gesture of the man playing with the watermelon. However, the backdrop and the crushing shadows and light create this sense of drama, mystery, and intense mood within the photograph, where I can focus on light and shadow, but make a picture that still tells a story as the man emerges as a silhouette alongside some of these pigeons in flight, creating drama and mystery and this intensity in the photograph, where the raw moment itself, the emotional impact in the frame, can be composed in an abstract way, where I'm using that interplay between light and shadow to reveal the shadow on the wall, and the moment itself becomes a bit more intense, and the mood of the photograph is elevated because of the way the shadow and light abstracts reality. And so I highly suggest some practical tips for experimenting and to create more abstract imagery by shooting high contrast black and white. I find this to actually be the simplest solution. I find that when shooting in color, it does become a bit more limiting in this regard to abstraction. And the only reason why I say that is because I find that some of the details of color can get in the way, whereas when you strip down to light and shadow with high contrast black and white, you can really see the way in which human emotion and form can interact. And I find that by shooting in black and white and focusing on simple gestures, body language, facial expressions, using deep silhouettes and shadow play, we can essentially remove all of the unnecessary clutter and all the unnecessary details in the photograph and really focus on that moment that gives visual impact. And so these are just a couple of the tips I have for experimenting on the streets practically. And here you can see a few different examples of my photography in high contrast black and white, and using a couple of different techniques of photographing on the street by focusing solely on the gesture of a woman walking by the street and the way her dress is flowing, and the ambiance of the lighting and the low light situation creates this drama and intensity in the frame, or the way in which the basketball player and the boy are interacting in that silhouette as the man goes to dunk the basketball. And then finally, the girl simply playing upon a ledge where you cannot see any human emotion or facial expression, but the gesture itself is what elevates the photograph and creates this fine line between abstraction and emotion. And so I find that photography, and especially street photography, where we're going out there and we're creating our own game, we're making photos for ourselves first and foremost. We're not working for anyone when we're taking pictures, so we don't need to go out there and tell the truth with our photography. We don't need to go out there and photograph with an agenda, but we can blend the best of both worlds between documentary and artistic expression. And to me, this is what creates great street photography. So I encourage you to find your own balance between abstraction and emotion, to simply go out there and to continue photographing and find yourself playing more, tinkering more, and experimenting and making photographs that don't necessarily depict what life is, but photograph what life could be. Create your own version of reality. To me, this is the power of photography. It's the ability for you to go out there and to create your own world through the camera. And so I encourage you to go out there and give it a try. Go out there and explore the unknown and continue shooting. And so hopefully some of these tips and ideas can help you. If you want to see the work of Ray K. Metzger, I actually posted on my YouTube channel a flip through of his work. So yeah, maybe you can find on my playlist where I have some photo books to study some of his work, as I believe it's a good resource. It's a good foundation to build upon and to have an understanding of some of the masters. Maybe we can go out there and use some of their ideas and build upon it. So yeah, thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.